Hey US history and happy May. I think it's crazy that we've made it this far, especially with what we've been through. I can't believe I haven't seen you guys since March. Oh my goodness. I miss you guys. I hope you're doing well. I love talking to you in our weekly meetings. Thank you guys so much for coming out to those. It really, it's a lot of fun. It kind of reminds me of the classroom a little bit, especially with all the bad jokes and, all of that. Excuse me. We are now entering a chapter that I know some of you have been very excited for the whole year. And as sad as I am that we can't talk about it together in the classroom, I'm excited to at least be able to talk about it in this way with you guys, okay? So let's talk about World War II, particularly the tyrants that made World War II feel very necessary. So, the early 1920s, the Americans are reveling in their return to normalcy. Harding and Coolidge and presidents are ruling in that way, and America is very happy to not be in any way involved in European affairs. Remember, they went back to isolation. Meanwhile, though, in Europe and further, international communism was born in Russia during World War I. Russia became communist in the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. And then was consolidated under dictator Joseph Stalin. The then two forms of National Socialism, not communism, reared their heads in Italy and Germany. Another militant nationalism grew in Japan. So let's talk about Italy first. Was Italy communist? No, Italy was not communist. Italy was fascist, which is a type of socialism. Okay, so they are... You can never remember how to spell fascism. Fascist. And their dictator's name, good grief, is Benito Mussolini. That is a B. Benito Mussolini. So in 1922, he came to power, and Italy became fascist, which is nationalistic, militaristic, and totalitarian. So fascism is kind of like a super nationalistic form of socialism. Mussolini promised that he would restore the glory of Caesar's empire in Rome. His black-shirted followers pronounced him Il Duce, which means the leader. So Il Duce was what he was called. If Italy were to have power and prestige in the world, Mussolini reasoned, the country would need to acquire foreign territories, and so he set out to start conquering. He, in search of very easy prey, he moved against Ethiopia in 1935. The Ethiopians were still, for the most part, using swords. They didn't have access to a lot of the gun manufacturing industry, and so they fought, but ultimately they're fighting machine guns, and they're not going to win. And so Mussolini very quickly conquered and annexed Ethiopia. To annex something means to basically make it part of your country. When the League of Nations tried to condemn Italy by voting sanctions, shutting off military supplies, the Italian representative said, "Cool, we don't need the League of Nations anymore." Later, of course, they're going to make an alliance with the German Nazis. But Germany is not a Nazi state yet. So what's happening in Germany? Germany becomes socialist, but it's a very harsh type of socialism. And of course, their dictator is Adolf Hitler. Okay, so in 1923, he's a German war veteran, and Hitler basically wants to overthrow the Bavarian government in Munich. This failed and landed him in jail. While imprisoned, he wrote his personal memoir of hatred, Mein Kampf, which means my struggle. And basically, he set forth his ideas for a new German order. He does not want to be part of the League of Nations anymore. He wants to rid Germany of the weakening influence of democracy. He thinks that democracy makes a nation weak. He wants to unite all the Germans. He is very against communists. He does not want to have any communists in the nation. And he also blames the Jews. After his release from jail, he preached his doctrines to these growing audiences, and he's a very powerful speaker. Hitler and his party, which was the National Socialist German Workers' Party, which was abbreviated as Nazi. So Nazi is actually an abbreviation for a German word Nationalsozialismus, which means National Socialist. And so that's where they get the term the Nazi from. He comes to power officially in 1933 when he's elected chancellor. Never forget that Hitler was democratically elected in an election process. He was voted in by the people. And he was established as the Führer, F-U-H-R-E-R, which kind of means, which is like leader. It does not mean father. He called the Nazi regime the Third Reich, which is meant to be the third great empire of Germany, and he wanted it to last 1,000 years. Gradually, very slowly, he creates a police state of blind nationalism, anti-Semitism, anti-Jew, and totalitarianism. So he doesn't run for chancellor on the premise of, I will rule you all and kill all the Jews. He runs on a premise of, I know how to make Germany economically stable again. I know how to make Germany great again. Germany is in debt. We're going through an economic depression. Here's the causes. Here's why this happened. The League of Nations did this. Democracy did this. Communism allowed this to happen. I know how to fight those things. And it sounded really good to the people listening. Then you also have, he's secretly rebuilding the German Navy, Army, and Air Force, which goes against the Treaty of Versailles. But he's doing it in secret, so the League of Nations doesn't know. So then, where else? We've got Japan. He gets elected in 1933. So in Japan, the Japanese came late to the scene of industrialism and world trade, but they found out that the European nations had carved out these Asian spheres of influence, and so Japan wants to fight back, so they start developing a lot of militarism. The Japanese wanted to carve out their own spheres through direct conquest, so their first show of force was Manchuria, which was a province of China, in 1931. In 1937, they start to launch a full-scale war against China, which ends up feeding into World War II. With the permission of Emperor Hirohito, Japan becomes a military dictatorship, and the military is led by Hideki Tojo. So they still have an emperor, but he's not really in charge anymore. It's more under Hideki Tojo. Okay, with the distraction of the Great Depression at home and the ongoing desire to remain isolated, the United States is not paying attention to this. They're not in any way checking Japanese aggression. In 1934, Japan canceled the Washington Naval Treaty, and relations with Japan continued to deteriorate. Japan is encountering absolutely no resistance from America or any other foreign powers. And as U.S. trade policies are tightening, Japanese leaders start developing a lot of animosity towards the United States, because the United States are really their only trade rival in the Pacific. And so whenever trade isn't going well for Japan, they blame the USA. In 1940, Japan officially Germans Italy and Germany to form the Rome-Berlin-Tokyo Axis, an alliance of dictator states. Okay, so 1940, you have Rome, Italy, Berlin, Germany, Tokyo, Japan, Axis, and they're going to become the Axis powers. But let's talk about the Soviet Union for a bit. First of all, it's not Russia right now. It's officially called the Soviet Union and has since the Bolshevik takeover in 1917. In Russia, the decades of the 20s and the 30s are some of the bloodiest years of human history. Joseph Stalin is overseeing systematic terror, bloodshed, and actually becomes one of the bloodiest tyrants all time, responsible for more deaths than Hitler. Stalin crushed all opposition in and out of the party. He would kill members of his own party. In 1928, he ordered the destruction of all resistance to his agricultural reforms, ordered the murder of at least 10 million men, women, and children. For comparison, it is estimated that 6 million people died in the Holocaust. In one swoop, Stalin orders the murder of at least 10 million, and yet we don't talk about it. Another 10 million probably died in Siberian slave labor camps, so we're already at 20 million deaths due to Stalin. Throughout the 1930s, Stalin continued to push Russia in the industrial age, fortify his own power. He said, "A single death is a tragedy. 1 million deaths is a statistic." He's callous, he's cruel, and he trampled any perceived threat by organized religion. A lot of people who are religious, Christians and other religions, died because Stalin was worried that they would have loyalty to their religion above loyalty to the state. Meanwhile, America is watching. They're saying, well, it's bad, but it's not our business. And so this is all kind of unfolding dramatically. So the Soviet Union is communist, led by Joseph Stalin. Now, please don't hear me say when I say that Stalin killed more people than Hitler, that Hitler is not bad. Hitler is evil. The Holocaust is pure evil. There's no other way to describe it. It's absolute horror. To read about it, to think about it, to hear about it, to go to places where it happened is unimaginably horrifying, and it should be. But just know that it wasn't just Hitler. This type of massacre, this type of horror is possible multiple times, multiple people, multiple ways. It makes us feel comfortable to think that, oh, Hitler was the worst there's ever been and no one will ever do that. That is not true. Genocides have occurred multiple times in multiple places under multiple people for different reasons. Okay, so just know that yes, Hitler was horrible, horrifying, horrendous. The conditions of the Holocaust were unimaginable. But he's not the only one that's done that throughout history. We have to recognize that this happens multiple times and can happen again. It can happen again, and we need to make sure it doesn't. Okay? So know that. Let's talk about war. Right? So right now, nobody's at war. They're just kind of doing their own thing. Hitler is not really a skilled diplomat and not really a military genius, but he is a master politician. Despite his open violations, the rest of Europe is doing nothing. Hitler has violated the Treaty of Versailles in multiple ways, and the rest of Europe is doing nothing. He's assuring other nations that he's only interested in consolidating German territory. He only wants to reestablish German control over places that they lost in World War I. He's just trying to get out of this economic depression that Germany's in. And so in March of 1936, German troops marched into the Rhineland, which is an industrial region of Germany near Alsace and Lorraine, that under the Versailles Treaty was not supposed to have any military in it. The League of Nations said, hey, you're not supposed to do that, and Hitler said, oops. The Germans then began building the Siegfried Line, which is a series of fortifications along the German bank of the Rhine River from the Swiss border all the way to the North Sea. Hitler claimed that the Siegfried Line is just a response to the Maginot Line that was French fortification on the other side of the river. Except for Winston Churchill, almost nobody in the League of Nations or British Parliament said anything. So now Hitler is building this line of fortifications, ready to fight, just across from where French has theirs. And they're like, well, if France has theirs, then we can have ours. That's all we're doing. Not a big deal. And nobody says anything. And then Hitler moves against Austria. He has long dreamed of this union, this Anschluss with Austria. It's a German-speaking land, and it's where Hitler was born. And despite explicit prohibitions in such unification in the World War I peace treaty, Hitler, in 1938, incited everybody in Austria who agreed with him to stage a coup. And then the Austrians, so after the coup happens and you have different people in power in Austria, the Austrians say to the Germans, hey, let's join us. Let's unite our countries. And Germany says, of course I will accept. And he looks over at Britain and France and says, try and stop me. And so through the Anschluss, in 1936, Hitler begins militarizing the Rhineland. In 1938, you have the Anschluss, that union with Austria. So now it's pretty much one country. Austria's under control of Germany. Then Hitler wants Czechoslovakia. The Führer declared that Germany had a right to annex the Sudetenland. Your pronunciation thing in the book is very off. And it's a predominantly German area in western Czechoslovakia. The Czech leaders went to the British and the French and they said, hey, can you stop him from attacking us, please? That would be great. And Britain and France is like, well, we could, but we're not going to because we don't want to, because we don't want to go to war with him. And so England's Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and France's Premier Daladier agreed to meet with Hitler in Munich, Germany in September 1938. And it's called the Munich Conference. And so Hitler's determined to get his way. He doesn't mind going to war. France and Britain do not want to go to war. To preserve the peace, France and Britain say, okay, fine. You know what, Hitler? If you want that chunk of Czech Republic, you can take it. We're not going to fight you. But don't take any more than that. And Hitler says, of course. I would never. And Chamberlain goes, cool. I fixed it. You're welcome. We're going to have peace now. This is a policy of appeasement. They're saying, well, if we give him what he wants, then maybe he won't take more. Think about a little kid throwing a tantrum for a piece of candy. If you give him a piece of candy, is he going to be satisfied forever? Or is he going to want more candy eventually, knowing that if he cries and screams enough, you'll get more? That's what Hitler's doing. Hitler's saying, well, I just want a little bit. And they say, well, we'd rather not go to war with you so you can have it, but don't take any more. And then Hitler takes a little bit more and says, oh, I just want that and I'll be happy. And they say, okay, you can have it, but don't take any more. And it's not working. In March of 1939, Hitler says, you know what? That's not enough for me. I want Poland. Or actually, he starts with Czechoslovakia. He says, I want the rest of Czechoslovakia. And he takes over Czechoslovakia. He literally invades and takes it over governmentally. And the British and the French are saying, wait, you said you weren't going to do that. And so they sign agreements with Romania and Poland saying, hey, look, we're serious. We are thinking about going to war if you keep doing this. And Hitler goes, okay. So now here's the issue. If Hitler wants to keep going east, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Austria, he's going to run into the Soviet Union. And he doesn't want Stalin to start getting nervous because he does not want to fight the Soviet Union. So throughout the spring and summer of 1939, Hitler seeks this non-aggression treaty with Stalin. He secretly offers Stalin a free hand to take Baltic countries of Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Finland, and a chunk of Poland. In exchange, Hitler wants to be able to invade Poland without the Soviet Union stepping in to stop him. The pact is not based on mutual trust, but basically it was, well, let's both get stuff that we want and not bother with each other. And it works. On August 23rd, 1939, the announcement of the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact was published. And Hitler said, cool, well, Britain and France haven't stopped me yet, so September 1st, 1939, he takes 1,600 of the Air Force, and they bomb, and they roll right into the Polish border, starting off World War I. Okay, so August 23rd, 1939, you have the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact, which basically says we won't fight each other. And just barely a week after that, September 1st, 1939, Hitler invades Poland. This is called the Blitzkrieg, which means lightning war, because it happened so fast and was such a strong strike. Okay. On September 3rd, Chamberlain reluctantly acknowledged his commitment to Poland, and Great Britain declares war on Germany. With equal dread and even more foot-dragging, France follows. They were very hesitant, and they basically said, okay, well, we're just going to wait and see what happens. We're not going to attack, but we are at war now. Okay? So, here's where we're at. Hitler has invaded Poland, started the war. What's the U.S. doing? They're not doing anything. They're saying, well, it's not our war. And so Hitler keeps going. He says, well, literally no one has stopped me. They've declared war. Britain and France have declared war, but they haven't done anything. So why wouldn't I keep going? So he does. In the spring of 1940, he begins his biggest push. The true meaning of Blitzkrieg became apparent. German armored divisions called panzers, assisted by fighters, bombers, paratroopers. They occupied neutral Denmark in a matter of hours. That same day, later that day, they attacked neutral Norway. Norway resisted, though. They fought for 62 days before they were ultimately betrayed. German destroyers sailed under land-based guns, but the guns had been sabotaged by a Norwegian, and then they took Norway. So what they've done is he took Poland, and then he took Denmark, and then he took Norway. Now he carries on. On May 10th, Germany launches a coordinated attack to the countries on the western border, all the way from France to the North Sea. The resistance in the Low Countries particularly is short-lived. You've got Luxembourg falls after 2 days. Holland, the Netherlands, 5 days. Belgium, 18 days. In June of 1940, the French army, which was by this point eventually reinforced by the British, found itself outflanked. penetrated. The Luftwaffe destroyed French fortifications. The German Stuka dive bombers dominated the air. These new weapons and tactics, a total change from the trench warfare of World War I. The French cannot keep up with it. The German forces drive the British and French's force northward, all the way to a French port of Dunkirk. But before the Germans can move to totally destroy them, this fog rolls over from the English Channel for several days, which grounded the Luftwaffe. Shortly before, Hitler had ordered his land armies to hold back, relying on the Air Force, but the Air Force can't operate under the fog. Communications fails, the army continues to hold back, and the usually efficient Nazi machine was grounded by a halt, and the Allies were emboldened by this new strength because they hadn't been destroyed. It's usually a good thing. And using fishing boats, yachts, and anything that would float, British citizens crossed the 22-mile wide English Channel to rescue 330,000 men. So they evacuated them. The Allies, again, they're encouraged. With the British gone, the French reserve gone, and Paris was abandoned because they had been forced out. France accepted German terms of surrender June 22nd, 1940. So less than a year of the war, Hitler now commands. Well, he already had Czechoslovakia before the war started, but he now commands Poland, Denmark, Norway, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. Less than a year. It's nuts. I know this is a little bit longer of a video, but hang in there, we're almost done. So Britain now is alone. They are the only country that has not surrendered to Germany and is actively at war with them. Hitler decides to bomb them into submission. And so he doesn't want to launch an invasion yet because he's not quite there yet. It's hard. It's hard to launch an invasion of an island. And so throughout the late summer and fall of 1940, the Battle of Britain takes place in the skies. Bombing during the daylight hours, though, starts to become too expensive. They're losing a lot of planes and a lot of pilots. And the British pilots who were shot down were usually rescued to fly again, but any German pilots who shot down had no chance of escape. The Luftwaffe began to change its tactics and began night bombing with firebombs. London, Plymouth, Manchester, Birmingham, Dover, Portsmouth, Coventry, they're all heavily damaged. Tens of thousands of British, usually civilians, are being killed or injured. But the British resolve was firm. They were inspired by Winston Churchill, and they said, Hitler knows that he will have to break us on this island or lose the war. If we can stand up to him, if we cannot surrender, then we may be able to free all of Europe. He said, this will be our finest hour. Yeah. So then what else is happening around there? Britain's holding out, managing to barely while they're being bombed like nobody's business. In the wake of the fall of France, though, continued bombing of Britain and the conquest of the Mediterranean, because Hitler's also attacking the Mediterranean, he decides to launch a massive surprise attack on the Soviet Union, who he was sort of allied with. 1941, 3 million troops. Let's see where we're at so far. So 1940, France surrenders. Basically, Hitler's meeting no resistance. So 1941, June 22nd, 1941, you have this Wehrmacht, which is the German army, invasion of the Soviet Union. They cover 500 miles within 2 months. That's a lot. Invade Soviet Union. The front stretches from the Black Sea to the Arctic. If you look at the map in your book on page 488, that is huge. It's a huge stretch of territory. In fact, look at that map and look at how much territory Hitler is able to get within 3 years. By September of 1941, the Russians are wheeling. The operation is codenamed Barbarossa. The Germans are launching attacks at 3 strategic cities: Leningrad, Moscow, and Stalingrad. There are 3 to the north, central, and south of the Soviet Union. They're engulfing the Soviet heartland by fierce and costly fighting. The Soviets are reeling. England is battered. 2 years after launching the Blitzkrieg against Poland, Hitler is essentially the master of Europe. And still, the Americans are saying, it is not our fight. It is not our fight. It is not our fight. We are sticking with this policy of isolation. But that's what's happening. So Europe is in shambles. Hitler controls, essentially, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, parts of Israel. I think that's Israel. No, that's not Israel. I apologize. It's not labeled. Parts of the Middle East, parts of the Soviet Union, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Prussia, Poland, Norway, Denmark, Czech Republic, Austria, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, Greece, Yugoslavia, Italy, France, Belgium, Netherlands. They're in charge of all of that. That's a lot. How does he lose? Tune in tomorrow and let's find out what America is doing at this point. You do have your Junopod for today. You also have a homework Junopod that is info on the 3 major dictators of World War II, Joseph Stalin, Benito Mussolini, and Adolf Hitler. You're going to be able to find most of the information in your book, but you might need to Google some of it. Please do not copy and paste from the internet. Please type it in your own words. Thank you. Okay, with that said, hope you've enjoyed today's lesson, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Bye, guys.